I was cleaning my rifle when the call came through. Just a routine afternoon at the base. My phone lit up with an unknown number, and something in my gut told me not to answer it. I answered anyway. The voice on the other end was a police dispatcher from Millbrook. She said my daughter and son were dead. She said it was an overdose. She said I should come identify the bodies. I dropped the phone. My hand stopped working. That was 4 hours ago. Now I'm sitting in my CO's office, and he's handing me a 48-hour military pass with a look that tells me everything I need to know. This wasn't an accident. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment your city or country. My name is Logan Ryder. I'm a Navy SEAL. 19 years of service. I've operated in places most people can't find on a map. I've lost brothers in combat. I've held men as they died. I've made peace with the possibility that I might not come home. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepares you for the moment you learn your children are gone. Ivy was 16. Mason was 13. They were supposed to be at a study group at a friend's house. That's what their mother, Daphne, told them they could do. That's what she told me when we talked on the phone last week. Everything was normal. Everything was safe. Until it wasn't. The hospital in Millbrook is a small facility, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. I drove there straight from the base. 3 hours of pure silence in my truck, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. When I walked through those doors, I already knew what I was going to see. A mother's grief is a sound you can't unhear. Daphne was in a waiting room, and when she saw me, she didn't say anything. She just made that sound. That animal sound that comes from the deepest part of a human being when everything has been taken. The official story was simple. Too simple. Ivy and Mason were at a party. Fentanyl was present. Both kids ingested it. Both kids overdosed. Case closed. Except it wasn't. I sat with Daphne for 2 hours. She was medicated, barely coherent, but the one thing she kept repeating was, "They wouldn't do this, Logan. They wouldn't. You know them. You know they wouldn't." I didn't know them. I knew Ivy was terrified of needles. I knew Mason had asthma and was careful about what he put in his body. I knew my kids, and everything about this story felt wrong. When I got back to base the next morning, Commander Adrian called me into his office before I even had a chance to change out of my travel clothes. Adrian and I went back 15 years. He was the kind of officer who actually gave a damn about his men. He didn't play politics. He didn't make mistakes. "I made some calls," he said, not wasting time with pleasantries, "to someone I know in the Millbrook Police Department. Logan, something's off with the narrative they're pushing." He slid a preliminary report across his desk. The autopsy wasn't complete, but the toxicology screen showed levels of fentanyl that didn't match a recreational overdose. The amounts were precise, clinical, like someone had measured it out. "There's more," Adrian continued. He pulled up a file on his computer. The responding officer at the scene was a guy named Dominic Garrett. He's been with the Millbrook PD for 12 years. In that time, there have been 3 complaints filed against him. Assault, intimidation. All of them disappeared from the system. No prosecutions. No consequences. My jaw tightened. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I think what happened to your kids wasn't random. And because I've got a contact at the FBI field office who owes me a favor. But before I call him, I need to know you're not going to do something that ends your career." I understood what he was saying. He was telling me that the system might not work. He was telling me that sometimes justice requires stepping outside the lines. "I gave you something," Adrian said. He handed me a piece of paper, a 48-hour military pass. "You take some time. You go down there. You ask your questions. You find your truth. But Logan, you do this clean. You don't do this like a SEAL. You do this like a man who wants answers." I took the pass. I understood the unspoken permission embedded in those 48 hours. What I didn't understand yet was why a CO would risk his career for a dead soldier's dead children. What I didn't know was that the answers I was looking for went much deeper than a single corrupt cop. That my children's deaths weren't the target, they were leverage. And that the real conspiracy ran through layers of power I hadn't even imagined existed. But I was about to find out. I rented a motel room in Millbrook, the kind of place where the neon sign flickers and the ice machine sounds like it's grinding bones. I didn't sleep that first night. Instead, I sat on the bed with my laptop and started pulling threads. Dominic Garrett had been on the force for 12 years, but his file only went back 7 years digitally. 7 years. Which meant someone had scrubbed the earlier records. That's not normal. That's not accidental. That's institutional protection. I started with the 3 assault complaints Adrian mentioned. All dismissed. All victims were civilians with no connection to each other. But when I dug deeper, really dug, using contacts from my SEAL days who worked in law enforcement, I found something else. The victims had one thing in common. They'd all filed complaints against other officers too. Officers who worked with Garrett. Officers who protected him. Officers who protected each other. This wasn't one corrupt cop. This was a system. A machine built to protect itself. By morning, I had names. 7 officers connected to Garrett through various incidents over the past decade. 7 officers who'd all been involved in cases that disappeared. Witnesses who recanted. Evidence that vanished. 7 officers and one clear pattern. Anyone who threatened their operation got handled. Quietly. Permanently. Sometimes literally. I drove to the Millbrook Police Department at 0800 hours. I wasn't there to confront anyone. I was there to observe, to understand the hierarchy, to see who took orders from whom. I sat in a coffee shop across the street for 3 hours. I watched officers come and go. I noted who talked to whom. I saw Dominic Garrett arrive at 0900, park in a reserved spot, walk through those doors like he owned the building. 20 minutes later, a man I recognized from the department's website, Lieutenant Preston Cole, emerged from the back. They didn't acknowledge each other, but the message was clear. Garrett had a handler. Preston Cole, the internal affairs officer. That's when it hit me. The corruption wasn't hidden despite the system. The corruption was protected by the system. The person whose job was to investigate misconduct was the one running the operation. I needed to know what my kids had stumbled into. What had they seen? What had they said? Why were they a threat? I drove to Millbrook High School. It was lunch period. I found Ivy's best friend, Harper, in the cafeteria and asked for 5 minutes outside. She was devastated about Ivy, but she was also young enough to want to help. The party at Quinn's house, I said carefully. Did Ivy or Mason mention anything strange that night? Anyone asking them questions? Anyone being weird? Harper's face went pale. They asked them about their mom. What do you mean? Asked them about their mom. One of the cops, the tall one, the one who seemed like he was in charge, he kept asking Ivy and Mason questions about where their mom works, who she talks to, if she ever mentioned police stuff. It was so weird. Like, why would he care about that? My stomach dropped. This wasn't random violence. This wasn't a drug deal gone wrong. My children had been interrogated by a corrupt cop. And when they didn't give him what he wanted, or when he decided they knew too much, they became disposable. But that meant Daphne was connected to something. Daphne knew something. Or someone thought she did. I drove straight to her apartment. She opened the door looking like a ghost. I could see the medication in her eyes, the sedatives that weren't nearly strong enough to numb what she was feeling. The police asked Ivy and Mason about you. I said without preamble. About your work. About what you know. Daphne's face went white. She tried to close the door, but I held it open. Don't, she whispered. Logan, don't ask me this. Our children are dead. You're going to tell me why. She led me inside. Her hands were shaking. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. 3 months ago, I started working as an administrative assistant for the district attorney's office. It's just filing, scheduling, basic stuff. But I access files. Criminal files. I was organizing some old cases, and I found something. A file that didn't make sense. A drug trafficking case from 8 years ago that was closed, but the defendant was never actually prosecuted. The evidence was there, everything was documented, but it just stopped. What was the defendant's name? I don't remember. I shouldn't have even looked at it. But Logan, When I went back to find it again to double-check, it was gone. The entire file had been deleted from the system. I told my supervisor about it, and she told me to forget I ever saw it. She said some things were better left alone, that I had a daughter and a son, and I should think about them before I did anything stupid. That was the threat. That was the warning they'd given Daphne. And when she didn't comply, they sent a message in a way she'd never forget. The DA's office knows about this, I said. They're connected to Garrett. I think so, Daphne said. I think that's why they killed them. Because they thought Ivy or Mason had told me something. Because they wanted me to know what would happen if I ever went public. I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't corruption at a police department. This was systemic. This involved the district attorney's office. This involved the people who were supposed to prosecute crime. The people who were supposed to protect the system. Which meant the system itself was rotten. I left Daphne's apartment and sat in my truck for an hour. I made a decision right there. I was going to find out exactly which file had been deleted. I was going to find out who that defendant was and why his case was worth killing 2 children to protect. And I was going to pull this thread until the entire structure came apart. But I was going to do it smart. I was going to do it the way Adrian had suggested. Not like a SEAL. Like a man with nothing left to lose and 48 hours to burn it all down. The real question wasn't who killed my children anymore. The real question was, who were they really protecting? I had a contact from my SEAL days. Victor, a former intelligence officer who now worked private security. I called him from my truck. I need access to a deleted file from the Millbrook District Attorney's office. 8 years old. Drug trafficking case. Can you do it? Probably. Give me 6 hours. I hung up and drove to the one place I hadn't gone yet. The address Daphne had given me during our divorce proceedings. Where she'd moved after we split. Where she'd been living her life without me. Where she'd gotten close enough to something dangerous to get our children killed. But before I went there, I needed to understand the timeline. I needed to know when she'd actually discovered that file. I called my lawyer, Thomas. He'd handled the custody agreement 5 years ago. The DA's office in Millbrook, I said. How long has Daphne worked there? 3 months, I think. What? Before that? She was doing freelance bookkeeping. Couple of small businesses. Nothing steady. 3 months. The exact time frame she'd mentioned. Which meant this had been building for exactly 3 months. Which meant someone had been watching her. Which meant they'd known the moment she found that file. I drove to the DA's office. It was a nondescript brick building on Main Street, the kind of place that looked like it had been built in the 1970s and never updated. I parked across the street and waited. At 1,700 hours, Daphne's supervisor walked out. Her name was Morgan Elliott. I'd seen her picture in the office directory online. Assistant District Attorney. Mid-50s. 15 years with the office. That meant she'd been there when the file was created. That meant she knew exactly what was in it. I followed her. Not tactically. I wasn't being a SEAL. I was being a father trying to understand why my children were dead. She drove to a restaurant on the edge of town. An upscale place. The kind where people conduct business that needs to stay private. She met someone there. A man in an expensive suit. I couldn't see his face clearly from my angle, but I could see the body language. Deference. Fear. She was reporting to him. Victor called back at 2,100 hours. Got it, he said. File was deleted 17 days ago. Official reason. Clerical error during system migration. Real reason. Someone with administrator access wanted it gone. Who had that access? Morgan Elliott. She's the only one with those privileges at the DA's office. What was the defendant's name? Hunter Valdez. Got arrested 8 years ago for running a fentanyl distribution network across 3 counties. Got busted with 40 pounds of product and cash. Should have gone away for 20 years minimum. Instead, the case was closed with a notation that the defendant was deceased. But Logan, there's no death certificate. No coroner's report. Nothing. The guy just officially died on paper. Hunter Valdez. A name that meant nothing to me. A name that had gotten my children killed. There's more, Victor said. I pulled his background. Before he was arrested, he was connected to someone. A supplier. The records are sparse, but his name shows up in intercepted communications. Your local DA office would have had access to those intercepts during the original investigation. The name? Preston Cole. Lieutenant Preston Cole from the Millbrook Police Department. The same Preston Cole who was Dominic Garrett's handler. The same Preston Cole whose career should have imploded 8 years ago. I sat in my truck outside that restaurant and understood what had happened. 8 years ago, the DA's office had built a case against Hunter Valdez. They'd documented his entire operation. They had evidence linking him to Preston Cole. And then, someone made a decision. Someone decided that Preston Cole was more valuable alive and protected than he was in prison. So they buried the case. They killed Hunter Valdez on paper. They let Preston Cole walk free. And for 8 years, the system had been protecting him. My kids had stumbled into the maintenance of that lie. I went back to Daphne's apartment at midnight. She was sleeping, medicated into unconsciousness. I didn't wake her. Instead, I searched her apartment systematically. Her bedroom, her office, her files. And I found it. A photograph, hidden in a book on her shelf. It was from 3 months ago. A candid shot of Daphne at what looked like a company event. She was smiling. She looked happy. She looked like someone with a secret. Standing 3 feet behind her in that photograph, partially out of focus, was Dominic Garrett. Not as a cop, as something else. As someone who belonged at a DA's office event. I sat on Daphne's couch and understood the truth I'd been avoiding. My ex-wife hadn't just stumbled into this. She'd been close to it. She'd been inside it. And the file she found hadn't been some random discovery. It had been something she was meant to find. Someone had wanted her to find it. Someone had wanted to know how she'd react. Someone had been testing her. And when she'd reported it to her supervisor, when she'd done the right thing, they decided she was a threat. Not to them directly, but to the stability of their operation. Because she'd proven she would talk. She'd proven she would try to do the right thing. So they'd send a message. A message written in the bodies of 2 children. Her silence wasn't protection anymore. It was complicity. She would never speak about what she knew because speaking meant accepting that her silence had led to Ivy and Mason's deaths. I understood then what Adrian had meant about the 48-hour pass. He wasn't giving me permission to kill anyone. He was giving me permission to move without the system's knowledge. Because the system itself was the enemy. The system was rotten all the way down. And Daphne, the woman I'd once loved, the woman who'd given me 2 beautiful children, had been caught inside it. The question now was, how deep did her complicity go? Had she known what she was walking into? Had someone recruited her? Or had she just been useful, and now she was disposable too? I spent the next 18 hours pulling every thread I could find. Victor sent me financial records, flagged transactions from the DA's office over the past 8 years. Deposits that didn't match salary structures. Transfers to accounts registered to shell companies. Money flowing in patterns that had nothing to do with legitimate government work. Preston Cole's bank account showed consistent deposits. Small amounts. Regular intervals. Exactly like someone was being paid to keep quiet. But the real money, the serious money, was going somewhere else. To Morgan Elliott. Not directly. Through intermediaries. Through lawyers and investments and real estate deals that made no sense for an assistant district attorney's salary. I was sitting in a 24-hour diner at 0400 hours, surrounded by paper and my laptop, when I realized something crucial. The money wasn't coming from drug operations. It was too clean, too structured. This wasn't about Hunter Valdez's fentanyl network anymore. That had been 8 years ago. That was the original sin that created the vulnerability. But what was happening now was different. Someone was protecting Preston Cole because he had value, because he was useful, because he could do things that needed to stay hidden. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. Stop digging. For your own good. I didn't respond. I didn't acknowledge it. Instead, I called Victor. Someone just warned me off, I said. Which means they know I'm looking. Expected, Victor replied. You've been asking questions. People in small towns talk. The question is what you do now. I knew what I had to do. I had to accelerate. I had to move before they moved against me. I drove to Millbrook High School at 0630 hours and waited in the parking lot. When Harper arrived with her friends, I called her over. She looked frightened. She should have been. The day of the party, I said, before Ivy and Mason went downstairs with the cops. Did they mention anything? Did they seem scared? Did anyone warn them? Harper hesitated. Fear flickered across her face. I'm not going to hurt you, I said quietly. I just need to know. Ivy got a text, Harper finally said. Right before. From her mom. It just said, be careful. Don't talk to police. We all thought it was weird because her mom never texts like that. It scared Ivy. She showed it to Mason. And then the cops showed up. Daphne had known. Not everything, but enough. She'd sent a warning. Which meant she'd known they were coming. Which meant someone had told her. Which meant this was orchestrated. Choreographed. Designed to look like accident while being anything but. I drove straight back to Daphne's apartment. She was awake this time, sitting on her couch in the dark, smoking a cigarette, something she hadn't done in 15 years. Who told you the police were coming? I asked. She didn't answer. Daphne. Who? Morgan, she whispered. Morgan called me that morning. She said there might be some police activity at the party. She said I should warn Ivy and Mason not to talk to anyone. That it was just a routine thing. That everything would be fine. You believed her. I believed she was trying to protect them. I felt something break inside me. The mercy. The assumption that Daphne had been a victim of circumstance. She'd been something worse. She'd been complicit. She'd been manipulated into complicity. And in trying to protect Ivy and Mason with a vague warning, she'd marked them as targets instead of protecting them. Morgan knew they'd be interrogated, I said. She knew what Garrett would ask. She was testing to see if they'd been told anything. To see if you'd told them anything. Daphne's face crumpled. I didn't tell them anything. I didn't tell anyone anything. But they couldn't be sure. And they couldn't risk it. I understood the full scope of the operation now. It wasn't just about protecting Preston Cole from his past. It was about protecting something much larger. Something that needed Preston Cole's access to police files. Something that needed Morgan Elliott's access to DA records. They were running something. A real operation. And Daphne had accidentally gotten too close to one of its structural supports. That deleted file, that buried case, that dead-on-paper defendant. I left her apartment and drove to the police department. I wasn't going inside. I was going to the parking lot. I waited for Preston Cole to arrive for his shift at 0800 hours. When he did, I memorized his vehicle information and ran the plates through my contacts. The vehicle wasn't registered to him. It was registered to a company, Valdez Security Consulting. Hunter Valdez, the dead man who wasn't dead. My hands went numb. This wasn't a buried case anymore. This was an active operation. Hunter Valdez was alive. He was working under a different identity. And Preston Cole was his inside man. Morgan Elliott was the one protecting the legal framework that kept him invisible. My children had been killed to protect a man the entire legal system believed was dead. I called Victor again. Pull everything you can on Hunter Valdez post-disappearance. I don't care how long it takes. Real estate purchases, business licenses, anything registered to variations of his name. Anything connected to Valdez Security Consulting. Logan, if this is what I think it is, it is. He's running something. And my kids found out about it. I had 24 hours left on my 48-hour pass. I could feel the net closing. They knew I was looking. They knew I'd figure it out. The only question was whether I'd figure it out before they decided I was a problem too. The second question, the one that kept me awake, was whether Adrian knew about Hunter Valdez. Whether my CO, the man who'd given me this pass, was part of the operation or actually trying to help me dismantle it. Victor called back at 1,130 hours with information that changed everything. Hunter Valdez isn't running Valdez Security Consulting, he said. The company is registered to someone else. Someone with deep pockets and connections. Logan, the owner is listed as Julian Hartley. Does that name mean anything to you? It didn't. Not immediately. but something in my gut told me it should. Julian Hartley, Victor continued, is a private military contractor. Government contracts mostly. He's got fingers in everything: security details, intelligence work, classified operations. The kind of guy who operates in the spaces between official channels. Why would he be protecting Hunter Valdez? That's the question, isn't it? But here's what I found. 8 years ago, when Valdez got arrested, there was a federal investigation running parallel to the state case. DEA, FBI, the works. That investigation was quietly shut down. Same time frame as your local DA closing their case. Federal prosecutors suddenly lost interest. Witnesses stopped cooperating. Evidence disappeared. Who shut it down? That's classified. Literally. Someone with authority to classify and declassify federal investigations. Someone high enough up that normal channels can't touch them. I felt the ground shift beneath me. This wasn't corruption at a local level anymore. This was federal. This was systemic in ways that made local police departments look like child's play. There's more, Victor said, and I could hear the hesitation in his voice. I found something about your CO Adrian and Julian Hartley. They served together. 15 years ago. Same special operations unit. They were tight. Really tight. My blood went cold. What are you telling me? I'm telling you that Adrian and Hartley have a history. I'm telling you that Adrian's call to the FBI field office, the one he said he was going to make for you, might not have been made. Or if it was made, it might not have gone where you think it went. I couldn't move. Couldn't think. Adrian had been my lifeline. Adrian had given me the 48-hour pass. Adrian had told me something was wrong. Had it all been a game? Had he been managing me the entire time? Give me everything on Adrian and Hartley, I said. Every deployment. Every contact. Everything. Already working on it. I hung up and sat in my truck, staring at nothing. The one person I trusted, the one person who'd given me permission to move, might have been controlling my movements the entire time, leading me down a path that looked like investigation, but was actually something else. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Logan. A woman's voice. Professional. Calm. This is Federal Agent Kendra Walsh with the FBI. We need to talk. About what? About the fact that you're investigating a matter that's currently under federal jurisdiction. About the fact that you're about to compromise an ongoing operation. And about the fact that if you don't stop right now, I'm going to have to arrest you. My children are dead. I know, and I'm sorry for that loss. But your children's deaths are part of something much larger. Something that requires patience. Something that requires you to step back and let the system work. The system killed my children. No, she said. Elements of the system killed your children. But there are other elements working to dismantle those corrupt pieces. If you interfere, you'll destroy months of work. You'll warn the people we're trying to prosecute. And you'll ensure that justice never happens at all. How do I know you're real? You don't. That's the point. You're going to have to trust me. Or you're going to have to keep digging, get arrested, and spend the next 5 years in prison while the real investigation continues without you. She gave me an FBI field office number and hung up. I called the number. It was legitimate. Agent Kendra Walsh did exist. She did work for the FBI's Organized Crime Task Force. And when I called back and asked for her specifically, she answered on the first ring. I knew you'd verify, she said. That's good. You're smart. That's why I'm going to be honest with you. I'm listening. Your CO, Adrian, is not the problem. He's actually one of the few people in the system trying to do the right thing. But he's operating with incomplete information. He doesn't know the full scope of what Hartley and his network are doing. And neither do you. Not yet. Tell me. I can't. Not over the phone. And not while you're in Millbrook. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to get in your truck. You're going to drive north for 2 hours. There's a rest stop off Route 7. You're going to be there at 1,600 hours. I'll meet you. We'll talk. And then you're going to understand why I need you to stop investigating your children's deaths. And if I don't show up, then I arrest you for obstruction of justice. And everything becomes much worse for everyone involved. I should have known something was wrong. I should have recognized the manipulation. But at that moment, I was drowning. I was a man whose children were dead, whose ex-wife was complicit, whose commanding officer might be part of the problem, and whose entire sense of reality had been shattered. I drove north. I arrived at the rest stop at 1,545 hours. I waited 15 minutes. A woman approached my truck, mid-40s, FBI credentials visible, but something else visible too. Genuine sadness in her eyes. Agent Kendra Walsh sat in my truck and told me the truth. Your children were collateral damage in something much larger, she said. Hunter Valdez isn't a drug dealer anymore. 8 years ago, he made a deal. Federal witness protection in exchange for testimony against his suppliers. Those suppliers included people connected to Julian Hartley. Hartley's network wasn't just protecting a criminal. It was protecting a witness. A critical witness in a case that reaches into multiple federal agencies. So they killed my kids to protect him. No, they killed your kids because Daphne got too close to discovering something. Not the witness protection. Something else. Something that connects Hartley to operations that are classified. Black budget operations. The kind of thing that doesn't officially exist. What kind of operations? The kind that require people like Preston Cole and Morgan Elliott to disappear evidence. The kind that require federal prosecutors to lose interest in cases. The kind that require a SEAL team commander to give his soldier 48 hours to do exactly what you're doing. Investigate. Because Adrian knows what Hartley is really doing. And he knows the system can't stop him. Not through official channels. I understood then. Adrian hadn't been managing me. He'd been freeing me. The 48-hour pass wasn't a leash. It was a gift. It was permission to do what the system couldn't. What does Hartley want? I asked. Power, Walsh said simply. He's building something. A private intelligence network. Parallel to official government channels. Using resources, people, and information that don't officially exist. Your children died because they represented a threat to operational security. Not because they knew anything important. Because Daphne might talk. Because Daphne might expose something that compromises the entire structure. So what do? You let me finish this investigation. You stop asking questions. You let justice happen through channels that actually work. Even if those channels are invisible. She left. I sat alone in my truck and realized the truth that would haunt me for the rest of my life. Someone close to me had been part of the setup all along. Not Daphne. Not Adrian. Someone else. Someone I hadn't even considered. Someone whose betrayal would hurt more than anything else I'd discovered. And I still didn't know who it was. I had 36 hours left on my pass. I wasn't going to waste them sitting still. Agent Walsh had told me to stop digging. She'd told me to let the system work. But systems don't work when they're designed to protect themselves. Systems don't work when the people running them are complicit. And systems definitely don't work when your children are already dead and buried. I drove back to Millbrook, but I didn't go to my motel room. I went to the public library. I needed information that wasn't classified. Information that was already in the open but hadn't been connected yet. I spent 3 hours pulling property records. Julian Hartley's company, Valdez Security Consulting, owned 12 properties across 3 counties. Warehouses, office buildings, residential addresses. I cross-referenced each one with local business licenses, utility connections, and tax records. One address stood out. A converted estate 40 miles outside Millbrook. Registered as a private security training facility. But the electrical usage was off the charts. The water consumption didn't match residential or training facility standards. And the property had been purchased 8 years ago, right when Hunter Valdez disappeared. I called Victor. I need satellite imagery of this address. Recent. Last 72 hours. Give me 2 hours. While I waited, I did something I should have done earlier. I called my ex-wife's sister, Tessa. She lived in California, but she'd always been close to Ivy and Mason. She'd always been the family member who actually paid attention. Tessa, I need to ask you something about Daphne. Logan, what's wrong? Is Daphne okay? I realized she didn't know. The news about Ivy and Mason hadn't reached her yet. Or maybe she was avoiding the truth the way people do when the pain is too large to accept. The kids are gone, I said quietly. Ivy and Mason. 3 days ago. The silence on the other end was absolute. There's more, I continued. And I need to know if you noticed anything unusual about Daphne in the last few months. Anything about her job, her relationships, her behavior. Tessa was crying now, but she answered me. She was different. Scared. She mentioned something about her boss, Morgan something. She said Morgan had taken her under her wing, was mentoring her, but it felt weird. Daphne said Morgan would text her at odd hours, ask her questions about cases, about what she'd seen in the DA's office. Did Daphne mention anyone else? Anyone connected to the police department? There was a cop, Preston something. Daphne seemed uncomfortable around him. She mentioned he'd called her a few times, said he was working on background checks or something. But Logan, she sounded scared when she talked about him. I knew this already, but hearing it from someone outside the situation crystallized something. Daphne had been groomed. Morgan had recruited her deliberately. Preston had been monitoring her. And when Daphne found that file, they'd tested her reaction. When she reported it to Morgan, they decided she was a liability. The children were collateral damage. But they were also a message. A message that said, stop asking questions or die. Victor sent the satellite imagery. The property showed vehicle movement. Multiple black SUVs entering and exiting over the past 72 hours. But more importantly, there was activity at night. Thermal imaging showed people moving inside the main building at 0300 hours. Not normal activity for a security training facility. This was an operational base. This was where Hartley was coordinating something. I needed to know what. And I needed to know who at the facility was managing the day-to-day operations. Because someone close to me had been involved in setting up Ivy and Mason. Someone I trusted. Someone I hadn't even considered as a suspect. I called Adrian. I needed to hear his voice. Needed to understand if Walsh had told me the truth about him. Logan. Status report. I'm working through it, I said carefully. I found some things. About Hartley. About the network. About why my kids died. There was a pause. Not over the phone. Come back to base. Tonight. We need to talk in person. That was the real answer. Adrian wanted me back. Adrian wanted to control the narrative. Or Adrian genuinely wanted to help. I couldn't tell anymore. I drove back to the military base, but I didn't go directly to Adrian's office. I went to the administrative records office. I had contacts there, people who owed me favors for my years of service. I pulled Adrian's personnel file. Confidential, but accessible to someone with the right clearance and the right relationships. What I found made my stomach drop. Adrian had been flagged by Internal Affairs 3 years ago. The investigation was sealed, but the date was visible. 3 years ago. Exactly when Julian Hartley's network would have been consolidating power. Exactly when they'd need someone inside military infrastructure. There was no official finding. No charges. No reprimand. Just the flag and then nothing. Which meant they'd cleared him. Which meant they controlled him. Which meant the 48-hour pass hadn't been permission to investigate. It had been permission to do something else. Something Hartley wanted me to do. I left the base without seeing Adrian. I spent that night in my truck outside the converted estate. Watching. Waiting. At 0430 hours, a convoy of vehicles left the property. 3 black SUVs. I followed at a distance, using techniques I hadn't used in 10 years, but that muscle memory never forgets. They drove to a private airfield 50 miles away. A small operation. The kind of place where questions aren't asked and records aren't kept. I watched from the tree line as men in tactical gear loaded equipment into a Gulfstream jet. Military-grade weapons. Surveillance equipment. The kind of hardware that doesn't exist in civilian operations. And then Hunter Valdez himself walked out of the facility. Older than his 8-year-old photograph. Thinner, but unmistakably him. He climbed into the jet. The aircraft took off at 0615 hours. Hartley was moving. Hartley was preparing for something. which meant my investigation had accelerated his timeline, which meant I was running out of time. I had 12 hours left on my 48-hour pass. 12 hours to figure out who the person close to me was. 12 hours to understand what role they played. 12 hours to make a decision about what I was going to do with the truth. I drove back to Millbrook. I went to the one place I hadn't looked yet, the party at Quinn's house. I needed to understand the physical layout. I needed to understand how Ivy and Mason had ended up alone with Dominic Garrett. I needed to understand the choreography of their deaths. Quinn's parents answered the door. They looked destroyed. They'd been harboring guilt about the party, about the fact that it had happened in their home. I need to see the basement, I said. They led me downstairs. It was finished, a typical teenage recreation space. Pool table, couch, a back door that led to the garden. And then I saw it. A security camera installed in the corner, pointing directly at that back door. A camera that Quinn's parents said wasn't theirs. A camera that had been installed by the security company 2 weeks before the party. Hartley's company, Valdez Security Consulting. They'd installed the surveillance. They'd known exactly when and where the children would be. They'd orchestrated the entire thing. But the question remained. Who had authorized that installation? Who at this house had been complicit? I asked Quinn's parents directly. Who contacted you about security upgrades? They exchanged a look. The kind of look that said they were keeping a secret. It was someone we knew. Quinn's father finally said. Someone from your world, actually. Your former commander, Colonel Evan Marcus. He said it was a favor. He said he wanted to make sure Quinn's parties were secure. He said there'd been some gang activity in the area. Evan Marcus, my former team leader, the man who'd trained me, the man I'd served under before Adrian, the man I'd trusted with my life, the man who'd set up my children to be killed. Colonel Evan Marcus had retired from active duty 4 years ago. He'd been my commanding officer during some of the most dangerous operations of my career. Syria, Afghanistan, classified missions that didn't have names and didn't appear in official records. He'd saved my life twice. I'd saved his once. That's the bond SEALs share. Blood and trust, and the absolute certainty that the man next to you will die before he lets you down. Except Evan Marcus had let me down in the worst way possible. I drove to his address, a modest house in a quiet suburb 2 hours from Millbrook. It was 0800 hours. His truck was in the driveway. Lights were on inside. He was home. I knocked on the door. He answered wearing civilian clothes, jeans, a flannel shirt, coffee in hand. When he saw me, his face didn't change. No surprise. No guilt. Just recognition. Logan, he said calmly. I wondered when you'd figure it out. You set them up. I did. The admission hit me like a physical blow. No denial. No excuses. Just the truth, spoken plainly, as if we were discussing the weather. Why? He stepped aside. Come in. You deserve to understand. I followed him into his living room. Everything was neat, orderly, military precise. He sat down across from me, set his coffee on the table, and met my eyes directly. 3 years ago, Evan began. Hartley approached me. He said he was building a network. Private intelligence. Off-the-books operations. The kind of work that keeps America safe when official channels can't move fast enough. He needed people with access. People with credibility. People who understood how the system worked. And you said yes. I said yes. Because I believed him. Because after 25 years of service, I'd seen too many situations where we had the intelligence, had the opportunity, but couldn't act because of politics or bureaucracy or lawyers. Hartley offered something different. He offered results. What does that have to do with my children? Evan's expression didn't change. Nothing. Your children had nothing to do with anything. But you did. My blood went cold. What are you talking about? Hartley needed you. Not your kids. You. You're one of the best tactical operators in SEAL history. You've got skills, contacts, and experience that are invaluable. Hartley's been trying to recruit you for 2 years. He approached you directly once. Do you remember? 18 months ago, at that security conference in Virginia. He offered you a consulting position. I did remember. I turned him down without a second thought. I told him I wasn't interested in private contracting, that my loyalty was to the Navy. You turned him down? Evan continued. That was a problem, because Hartley doesn't take no for an answer. And he realized something about you. You're motivated by loyalty, by family, by the people you love. So he decided to create a situation where you'd have no choice but to work with him. He killed my children to recruit me. No, he killed your children to leverage you. There's a difference. He needed you broken. He needed you desperate. He needed you standing exactly where you're standing right now, with nothing left to lose and no one left to trust. Because when you're in that state, you'll do anything to get justice. And that's when he approaches you again. That's when he offers you the resources, the intelligence, the support to destroy the people who killed your kids. All you have to do is join his network. I couldn't breathe. The entire investigation, the 48-hour pass, the clues, the breadcrumbs, had been designed, orchestrated. I'd been following a script Hartley had written. Adrian, I said, is he part of this? Adrian is complicated. He's not part of Hartley's network, but he's not clean either. Hartley has leverage on him. 3 years ago, Adrian made a mistake. A bad call during an operation that got civilians killed. Hartley buried the evidence. In exchange, Adrian does what Hartley needs when Hartley needs it. Like giving you a 48-hour pass so you'd investigate. Like making sure you found exactly what Hartley wanted you to find. And Agent Walsh, she's real FBI, but she's also on Hartley's payroll. Not officially, just cooperatively. She feeds him information. She delays investigations. She makes sure federal oversight doesn't interfere with his operations. I stood up. My hands were shaking. You murdered my children to recruit me. I facilitated their deaths, Evan corrected. Preston Cole and Dominic Garrett did the actual killing. On Hartley's orders. And before you ask, yes, it was fentanyl. Precise doses. Administered by Garrett during those 5 minutes in the basement. Your children didn't suffer. That was a mercy Hartley allowed. I wanted to kill him. Every fiber of my being screamed to put my hands around his throat and squeeze until his face turned blue. But I didn't move. Because there was something else. Something Evan hadn't said yet. Why are you telling me this? Because Hartley's plan worked. You're here. You've done the investigation. You've followed the trail. And now you understand that the system won't give you justice. The police are corrupt. The DA's office is complicit. The FBI is compromised. There's only one way to get revenge for Ivy and Mason. And that's through Hartley's network. You think I'd work for the man who killed my kids? I think you'll work for the man who can give you Preston Cole, Dominic Garrett, and Morgan Elliott. I think you'll work for the man who can make them pay in ways the justice system never could. And I think when it's all over, you'll realize that Hartley was right. That sometimes terrible things have to happen to create soldiers who are willing to do what needs to be done. I understood then. This wasn't just about recruitment. This was about transformation. Hartley wanted to break me completely. He wanted to strip away every moral boundary, every ethical consideration, every shred of humanity that kept me from becoming the kind of operator who could do anything without hesitation. I have a message for Hartley, I said quietly. What's that? Tell him I'm coming. But I'm not coming to join him. I'm coming to destroy everything he's built. And I'm starting with you. Evan smiled. It was a sad smile. The smile of a man who'd already accepted his fate. I know. That's why I'm telling you this. Because you deserve to know the truth before you try. And because when you fail, and you will fail, Logan, you'll understand that joining Hartley was always the only option. I left his house. I got in my truck. I drove for 2 hours without knowing where I was going. And when I finally stopped, I realized something that changed everything. My children hadn't been killed because of Daphne's discovery. They'd been killed because of me. Because I'd said no to Julian Hartley. Because I'd refused to be part of his network. Their deaths weren't collateral damage. They were punishment. They were leverage. They were the price of my integrity. And now Hartley was waiting for me to break. Waiting for me to come crawling. waiting for me to trade my soul for revenge. The question was, what was I going to do instead? I drove back to the military base. It was 1,400 hours. I had 6 hours left on my 48-hour pass, and I wasn't going to waste them wondering if Adrian was complicit or controlled. I went directly to his office. His secretary tried to stop me. I walked past her. Adrian was on the phone. When he saw me, he ended the call without saying goodbye. He gestured for me to sit. I remained standing. Evan Marcus told me everything, I said. He told me about Hartley. He told me about the recruitment. He told me that you've been playing me this entire time. Adrian didn't deny it. He stood up and closed his office door. What Evan told you was partially true, Adrian said calmly, and partially designed to break you. That's how Hartley works. He mixes truth with manipulation. He creates situations where people feel like they have no choice but to surrender. Then explain it to me. Explain how giving me a 48-hour pass wasn't manipulation. Adrian walked to a safe in his office. He opened it and pulled out a folder. He handed it to me. Open it. Inside was documentation, military files, intelligence reports. Everything was classified, marked with security clearances I'd never seen before. But the content was clear. Hartley's network wasn't just a private intelligence operation. It was something far worse. For the past 8 years, Hartley had been operating unauthorized military operations across 6 countries. Operations that violated international law. Operations that killed civilians indiscriminately. Operations that had nothing to do with American security and everything to do with profit. He was selling military services to private corporations. He was conducting regime change operations for the highest bidder. He was running black market weapons deals and terrorist financing schemes under the cover of legitimate government contracts. And the people protecting him, Preston Cole, Morgan Elliott, federal prosecutors, FBI agents, were all on his payroll. How did you get this? I asked. That's classified. But understand this. I've been investigating Hartley for 3 years. I've been building a case. The problem is that his network extends into every level of government. Federal, state, local, military, civilian, private sector. Everywhere I turn, there's another connection. Another link in the chain. And my children? Adrian's expression hardened. Your children were killed because Hartley knew I was close to approaching you with this information. He killed them to prove that he controls the equation. He killed them to show you that he could reach you anywhere, anytime, in any way. And he did it because Evan Marcus told him that you were the one person I trusted. The one person who could help me dismantle his entire operation. So you gave me the 48-hour pass to what? Investigate on my own? Hope I'd figure it out. I gave you the 48-hour pass because I needed Hartley to think he was winning. I needed him to believe that his manipulation was working. Because while you were following the breadcrumbs he left for you, I was moving pieces into position. I was coordinating with federal prosecutors who aren't compromised. I was building an actual case that can survive legal scrutiny. Adrian pulled out another document. 3 hours ago, we got a warrant. Federal SWAT is moving on Hartley's primary facility, the converted estate you were watching. We're taking down his operation. We're arresting everyone involved. And we need you as a witness. I read the warrant. It was legitimate. Signed by a federal judge. Authorized by prosecutors with credible oversight. Everything Adrian was telling me matched the documentation. But I'd been lied to by people I trusted before. How do I know this isn't another layer of manipulation? Adrian looked me directly in the eye. You don't. That's the burden of this situation. You have to choose who to trust. And I understand if you choose not to trust me. I understand if you think I've been playing you the entire time. But Logan, I've got 12 federal agents arriving at your location in 20 minutes. They're going to take you into protective custody. They're going to debrief you. They're going to use your testimony to build prosecutions against everyone involved in your children's deaths. If I was working for Hartley, I wouldn't do any of this. I'd let you walk into the trap he's set. I'd let you join his network. And then I'd eliminate you once you were no longer useful. Why should I believe you? Because I'm going to show you something. Adrian pulled up a video file on his computer. This was recorded 2 hours ago. It's a conversation between Hartley and Evan Marcus. The video played. Hartley and Evan in a secure facility discussing me. Hartley talking about how my rejection had wounded his pride, how killing my children would break me, how my recruitment into his network would make me the perfect operator, a man with nothing left to lose and everything to gain through violence. But then something changed. Evan said something that made Hartley smile. "He's going to come to you," Evan said. "After he figures out what I've told him. He's going to be broken. He's going to be desperate. And he's going to want to join you." Hartley nodded. "And then we'll have him. A SEAL operator with nothing left. A man willing to do anything." The video ended. "That's insurance," Adrian said. "That's proof that Hartley planned to manipulate you into his network. That's documentation of conspiracy. That's a piece of the puzzle that makes everything else work." "How did you get that recording?" "Because Evan Marcus isn't as committed to Hartley as he claims to be. Because the guilt of what he did, orchestrating your children's deaths, broke something inside him. Because he agreed to wear a wire and record his conversations with Hartley in exchange for immunity." I sat down. Everything I thought I understood had just shifted again. "Evan's going to testify against Hartley?" I asked. "He's going to testify about everything. The recruitment, the network, the operations, all of it. And he's going to testify that he was coerced into participating by threats against his family. It won't save him. He's still going to prison. But his testimony is going to help us dismantle the entire structure." "What about Preston Cole, Dominic Garrett, Morgan Elliott? They're being arrested in approximately," Adrian checked his watch, 40 minutes. "Along with 17 other operatives. Federal charges. RICO conspiracy. Murder. Wire fraud. It's a complete takedown." A knock on the door. 2 federal agents entered. "Commander Adrian," one of them said. "We need to move." Adrian stood. "Logan, you're going with them. They're going to take you to a safe location. Tomorrow, we're going to debrief you comprehensively. And then we're going to prepare you to testify at trial." "What about Hartley?" Adrian's expression was grim. "He's been arrested. Federal agents moved on his location at 1,300 hours. He's in federal custody as we speak." I wanted to feel relief. I wanted to feel like justice was finally happening. But all I felt was emptiness. Because arresting Hartley, imprisoning Cole and Garrett, destroying his network, none of it would bring Ivy and Mason back. The federal agents escorted me out of Adrian's office. As I was leaving, Adrian called after me. "Logan, I know you don't have reason to believe me, but I want you to know everything I did for you. Everything I did was to give you a path to justice that didn't require you to destroy yourself." I didn't respond. I got in the federal vehicle. I was driven to a secure location. And for the first time in 3 days, I allowed myself to cry. Because the investigation was over. But the real reckoning was just beginning. The safe house was a nondescript property in rural Virginia. For bedrooms, 2 agents assigned to watch me, and a direct phone line to the federal task force coordinating the prosecutions. They gave me a room. They brought me food I couldn't eat. They left me alone with my thoughts, which was the cruelest punishment of all. The first trial started 3 weeks later. United States versus Preston Cole, Dominic Garrett, and Morgan Elliott. Conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, RICO violations. Federal charges that carried mandatory minimum sentences in the range of 30 to 40 years. I sat in the witness stand and told my story. I described finding Ivy and Mason's bodies in the hospital. I described the investigation that led me from Garrett to Cole to Elliott to Hartley. I described Evan Marcus walking me through the manipulation. I described what it felt like to understand that your children's lives were nothing more than leverage in someone else's operation. The defense attorneys tried to shake me. They suggested I was biased. They suggested I had motive to lie. They suggested that my investigation was contaminated by grief and rage. But the evidence supported my testimony. The financial records, the security camera footage, The forensic toxicology reports showing the precise administration of fentanyl. The recorded conversations between Hartley and Evan Marcus discussing the operation. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. The verdict was guilty on all counts. Preston Cole received a life sentence. Dominic Garrett received 45 years. Morgan Elliott received 38 years. The judge, a federal judge named Oliver Hamilton, one of the few unsullied members of the judiciary, looked directly at them as he pronounced sentence. You preyed on the innocent. You corrupted the institutions designed to protect them. And you attempted to silence a father's pursuit of truth. This court finds your crimes particularly heinous and recommends no possibility of parole. I sat in the gallery and felt nothing. Their imprisonment wouldn't bring Ivy and Mason back. Their suffering wouldn't undo what they'd done. But it was something. It was acknowledgement that they were guilty. It was the system working the way it was supposed to work. The second trial was more complex. United States versus Julian Hartley. Conspiracy. Operating an unauthorized military operation. Violation of the Arms Trade Treaty. Money laundering. Terrorism financing. 37 charges in total. This trial lasted 6 weeks. 17 federal prosecutors presented evidence. 32 witnesses testified. The documentation of Hartley's crimes was staggering. He'd conducted military operations in Yemen, Syria, Afghanistan, and Pakistan without authorization. He'd sold weapons to organizations designated as terrorist entities. He'd accepted millions in bribes from foreign governments. He'd orchestrated assassinations of journalists, activists, and political opponents who threatened his operations. And the most damning testimony came from Evan Marcus. My former commanding officer sat on the witness stand and systematically dismantled every defense Hartley presented. He described the recruitment process. He described the operations. He described the decision to kill my children. He described Hartley's explicit instructions to make the deaths look accidental. He described the payment he received, $50,000, for facilitating the murders. Under cross-examination, Hartley's defense attorneys tried to portray Marcus as a disgruntled operator seeking revenge. Marcus never wavered. I facilitated the murder of 2 children, he said calmly. I did this because I was a coward. I was afraid of what Hartley would do to me if I refused. That fear doesn't excuse what I did. Nothing excuses what I did. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life understanding the enormity of that failure. The jury convicted Hartley on 34 of 37 charges. Life without parole on the murder conspiracy alone. Additional consecutive sentences on the other charges meant he would die in prison. The federal judge, the same Judge Oliver Hamilton, looked at Hartley before pronouncing sentence. You built an empire on violence. You corrupted institutions designed to serve the people. You demonstrated a profound contempt for human life and human dignity. This court sentences you to 4 consecutive life sentences, each without the possibility of parole. You will spend every remaining day of your existence in a federal penitentiary, contemplating the destruction you caused. I watched from the gallery as federal marshals led Hartley away in chains. He didn't look at me. He didn't acknowledge my presence. He was already gone, already retreating into whatever mental space allowed him to avoid confronting what he'd become. But there was one more thing that needed to happen. After the trial, I met with the federal prosecutors. We discussed the victims, not just Ivy and Mason, but the hundreds of civilians killed in Hartley's unauthorized operations. We discussed the institutional damage, the corruption that ran through law enforcement, the judiciary, and federal agencies. We discussed what needed to happen to ensure it never happened again. There's someone else who needs to be held accountable, I said. Agent Kendra Walsh. She was compromised by Hartley. She helped cover up his operations. The lead prosecutor, a woman named Violet Shaw, nodded. We know. We've already arrested her. She's cooperating with the investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence. She's going to testify about the federal-level corruption. She's going to describe how Hartley infiltrated the FBI, the DOJ, and the State Department. What about the other agencies? What about the politicians who accepted Hartley's bribes? We're investigating. That's going to take time. But Logan, we're not going to stop. We're going to dismantle everything Hartley built. We're going to expose every connection, every corrupt official, every compromised institution. I left that meeting with a sense of something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not peace exactly, not healing, but purpose. The knowledge that the system, despite its corruption and its failures, could still function, could still deliver justice when people were willing to fight for it. The last meeting was with Adrian. It happened in his office at the naval base, 3 months after Hartley's conviction. "We're recommending you for commendation," Adrian said. "Officially, for your service in the investigation. Unofficially, for your willingness to pursue truth even when it would have been easier to join Hartley's network." "I almost did join him," I said quietly. "There were moments when I wanted to, when I wanted to hurt people the way I'd been hurt. I know, and I understand why. But you didn't. You chose a different path. That choice, that commitment to justice over vengeance, that's what separates us from the people we're fighting against." "What happens now?" "Now you heal. You spend time with Daphne figuring out how to survive this together. You think about Ivy and Mason and honor their memory by living a life they would have been proud of. And you know that everyone responsible for their deaths is going to spend the rest of their lives in prison, contemplating what they did." I didn't respond. I couldn't. The tears came without warning, without permission. Adrian didn't offer comfort. He just sat with me while I grieved. Because some things can't be fixed with words or time or justice. Some losses are permanent. Some wounds never fully heal. All you can do is learn to live with the scar tissue. All you can do is let the people you love know they matter. All you can do is make sure their deaths meant something. And that's what this had become. A reckoning. A moment when the system turned against itself and delivered justice. Imperfect, incomplete, but real. My children were gone, but they were no longer forgotten. They were no longer just victims of corruption. They were the reason an empire of darkness had been dismantled. That would have to be enough. 6 months after Hartley's conviction, I stood in a cemetery in Millbrook on a cold November morning. The headstones read, Ivy Ryder, 2008 to 2024. Mason Ryder, 2011 to 2024. There were fresh flowers at their grave, roses that Daphne had placed there the day before. I came here every week, not out of obligation, out of necessity. This was where I felt closest to them. This was where I could talk to them without anyone listening, without anyone judging, without anyone trying to fix the unfixable. "I wanted you to know they're all in prison now," I said to the headstones. "All of them. Hartley, Cole, Garrett, Elliot. They're never getting out. They're never going to hurt anyone else. I know that doesn't bring you back. I know it doesn't make any of this okay. But I wanted you to know that I finished what I started." A hand touched my shoulder. Daphne. She looked different now. Older, but also stronger. The sedatives were gone. The blank stare had been replaced by something that looked almost like purpose. "Thank you for bringing them flowers," I said. "They were our children," she replied. "That was never going to stop. No matter what I did or didn't know. No matter what I failed to see. We've been working with a therapist for the past 4 months. Trying to understand how we could have missed the warning signs. Trying to forgive ourselves for not protecting Ivy and Mason better. Trying to find a way to co-parent through grief." "I got a job offer," Daphne said, "at a law firm in Boston. They specialize in prosecuting white-collar crime. They heard about what happened here. They want me to help build cases against corrupt government officials. Are you going to take it?" "I think so. I need to do something with what I know. I need to make sure that what happened to Ivy and Mason doesn't happen to anyone else's children. But I wanted to ask you first, because wherever I go, I want you involved. I want us to raise Daphne Jr. together. I want us to be a family again, even if it's different now." We stood together in silence, looking at the grave. After a moment, Daphne spoke again. "Do you think they knew? At the end? Do you think they understood what was happening?" "No," I said, and I meant it. The fentanyl worked quickly. They probably felt confused for a moment. Then they felt nothing. The cruelty wasn't in their deaths. The cruelty was in us being left behind to figure out why. That's not comforting. No, but it's honest. And I think Ivy and Mason would have wanted us to be honest about this. To not sanitize it or make it prettier than it was. They died because corrupt people made a choice. And now those corrupt people are in prison because other people made a different choice. That's not justice in the way we want it. But it's real. 3 weeks later, I met with Agent Violet Chun. The federal investigation was continuing. They'd uncovered connections between Hartley's network and government officials in 7 countries. International arrests were happening. Extradition proceedings were underway. The ripple effects of dismantling Hartley's operation were spreading globally. "We wanted to thank you," Chin said. "Your testimony was pivotal. Without it, we wouldn't have had the credibility to pursue some of the higher-level prosecutions." "I didn't do it for thanks. I know. You did it for your children. But I wanted you to understand that their deaths, as tragic as they are, led to the dismantling of one of the most extensive criminal networks we've ever encountered. That has to mean something." It did mean something. But it also didn't. Both things could be true simultaneously. Ivy and Mason's deaths had justice built on top of them. And Ivy and Mason's deaths would still always be an irreplaceable tragedy. I left the federal building and drove to the military base one last time. Adrian was waiting in his office. "I'm resigning," I told him. "I've given 20 years of service. I've earned my pension. I'm going to take some time. Figure out what comes next." Adrian nodded. "I expected you might. What will you do?" "I'm going to travel. I'm going to spend time with my daughter. I'm going to help Daphne build her law practice. And I'm going to use my experience to consult on cases involving corruption. I'm going to make sure that people who can't fight these battles on their own have someone in their corner." "That sounds like the right path," Adrian said. "Logan, I want you to know something. The choices you made during those 48 hours, the decision to pursue justice through the system instead of through violence, that choice will echo for years. That choice saved lives. Or it just delayed vengeance," I said. "I'm still not sure which. That's wisdom. The best people are never entirely sure about their choices. It's the certainty that's dangerous." I left the base and drove back to the cemetery one final time. I sat by Ivy and Mason's grave as the sun was setting. The sky was turning colors I couldn't quite name, somewhere between purple and gold and something that didn't have a name. "I'm going to tell you something I probably should have told you while you were alive," I said to the headstones. "I was proud of you, not because of what you accomplished, not because of your grades or your athletic achievements or any of the things parents are supposed to be proud of. I was proud of you because you existed. Because you were good people in a world that doesn't always reward good people. Because you laughed easily and loved generously and trusted people the way children should be able to trust people without having to worry about getting hurt." I paused. The wind moved through the cemetery, and it sounded almost like breathing. "The people who killed you are in prison now. They're going to spend the rest of their lives thinking about what they did, about the choice they made to take you from me. That's not revenge. That's not satisfaction. But it's real. And it's something." I stood up and placed my hand on their headstone. The granite was cold, real, permanent. "I'm going to keep living," I continued. "I'm going to build a life that honors the fact that you lived. I'm going to fight for other people's children. I'm going to make sure that corruption doesn't get to hide behind badges and titles. And I'm going to remember you every single day for the rest of my life. Not as victims, as the people you were. Ivy, who wanted to be a doctor. Mason, who loved music. My beautiful, irreplaceable children. I want to ask you something. Where are you watching this from? What city? What country? Drop your location in the comments. I want to know who's hearing this story. I want to know where in the world people are taking time out of their day to listen to a father's grief and a justice system finally working the way it should. And if this story moved you, if it made you feel something real and deep, please hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel for more betrayal stories, more revenge narratives, More stories about ordinary people fighting against corruption and darkness. Stories about justice that doesn't come easy. Stories about people who refuse to break. Most importantly, tell me in the comments, what kind of stories do you want to hear? Do you want more military thrillers? Do you want more stories about family betrayal? Do you want stories where the system actually works? Tell me what speaks to your heart, and I promise you, I will bring you stories that match that passion. Stories with shocking twists. Stories with emotional depth. Stories that make you think. Stories that make you feel like you're not alone in this complicated, broken, beautiful world. I've got more stories coming. Bigger stories. Stories with even more unexpected turns. Stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat until the very last second. So subscribe. Hit that notification bell. Tell your friends about this channel. Because storytelling isn't just about entertainment. It's about connection. It's about understanding that other people have survived impossible things. It's about knowing that justice, real justice, is possible when we refuse to give up. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to Logan's story. Thank you for caring about Ivy and Mason, even though they existed only in these words. More stories are coming.